Every fighting game genre started from a trailblazer. Capcom's Street Fighter II began the traditional concept of 2D fighting games in 1991. Sega's Virtua Fighter pioneered the concept of a fully 3D fighting game in 1993. And Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. Established the concept of a platform fighter in 1999. But have you noticed something odd about these examples? Every genre, except 3D fighters, kept its grandfather at the throne. Street Fighter still dominates the 2D scene 34 years later. Smash Bros. Still dominates the platform fighter scene 26 years later. But Virtua Fighter is different. Now Tekken stands on the throne for 3D fighting games, and its rivals are all but dead. Virtua Fighter is of course now mounting an uphill comeback with its upcoming 6th installment. But how has Tekken, often cited in the early days as a Virtua Fighter clone, managed to stay on top of the genre for almost 30 years? What did Namco do that Seg ain't? I tried. What's new with you, my very blue crew? Welcome back to the Blue Horizon channel. I'm your nostalgia spirit host, Blue Horizon, broadcasting live from Cafe Azul with my bird friend here, Jay. Continuing the trend of just talking about whatever the I want on this cozy little channel, this week's topic has yet again shifted back over to Tekken. I'll be answering lots of questions today. Where the franchise started, how it rose to fame, who its competitors were, and why it may finally be properly contested in the near future. So grab some water and let's get right into it. Tekken started off as the brainchild of a Mr. Seiichi Ishii in 1993. He worked for Sega's AM2 division under the famous Yu Suzuki and was known as being game designer on both Virtua Racing as well as the original Virtua Fighter. Many would also call him a co-creator of Virtua Fighter, as he was the man primarily responsible for designing the gameplay aspects that made that game fun. Virtua Fighter hadn't even been released yet, however, and he was already feeling the need to jump ship. Speaking in a recent interview with 4Gamer, he said, "I personally wanted to take more time to develop Virtua Fighter as my own game, but almost everyone at AM2 Lab ended up creating it all at once. Their individuality was infused into the game, which made it better, but I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could make something similar on my own." He then left for Namco. He liked the company due to the fact that they beat Sega to the punch on using texture mapping with Ridge Racer. Turns out Namco was aggressively pursuing Virtua Fighter's success, and Ishii, as a previous game designer at their rival company, was allowed full creative freedom to make whatever he thought could compete with his previous work over at Sega. That meant finally being a director. So he got busy getting a team together of both people who qualified from within Namco and those he wanted from outside of it. This is where the Tekken project comes from, that undoubtedly many of you, I'm sure, have always seen in trailers and promotional videos of the franchise through the years. It was quite literally a project team gathered together within Namco's offices, specifically focused on developing Tekken as a franchise. So they developed the game. Quick. Although not yet quite as popular as its contemporary, which had already moved on to the sequel, Virtua Fighter 2, Tekken earned a respectable amount in arcades, and an even more respectable amount on console. Most people could agree it played a bit more like a stiff tech demo, offering a glimpse of things to come, but it had a few promising standouts. First off was its unique control scheme, with each of the 4 buttons intuitively corresponding to the character's limbs. Tekken also included full motion CG cutscenes for each character that gave players a deeper look into their backstories and motivations, a first for fighting games. The other factor, an often unsung hero for popularity in the arcade days, was that Tekken was cheaper to play, at roughly 50 cents per play compared with Virtua Fighter 2's $1 or so. This could be done because unlike Sega's Model 2 arcade board, it was running on the more budget-friendly System 11 board. Now, for those that don't know, this is a gigantic piece of the puzzle here, and this is where Sony steps into the picture. You've probably noticed looking back at Tekken history that from the very first game, Tekken had PlayStation exclusivity for over a decade, spanning about 5 mainline titles, not even including Tekken Tag Tournament or Tekken 5 DR. Namco and Sony had been very cozy together since 1994, and this was no accident. During the development of Tekken 1, the System 11 arcade board was a strategic partnership between the two companies. Namco developed the board to comply with the PlayStation system's hardware, which was planned to release later that year. While it was a computational downgrade from the System 22 they started to develop Tekken on, the beauty of this strategy was in all of the marketing details. For Namco, this pivot to less powerful hardware brought down the price of their future arcade cabinets. The company shifted focus to the vast market of mid-range, smaller arcades that don't have thousands of dollars to shell out for a new cabinet, but wanted to be part of the new 3D polygon craze. Sony, being a consumer electronics company first and foremost, with zero game industry experience, now had a sort of unofficial first-party developer, able to produce arcade-quality games just for them. Because both systems had similar architecture, Namco's console ports to the PlayStation were not only easy to convert, but felt pretty much arcade perfect, starting a shift towards developing arcade games with the home experience dictating hardware decisions rather than the other way around. So Tekken's popularity flourished, not only in smaller arcades, but later at home, quickly becoming the first ever PlayStation game to sell over 1 million units. PlayStation now had their very own exclusive 3D fighting game franchise. But where did it go from there? How did it rise to true fame? Just like you can help Blue Horizon, that's me, rise to true fame by subscribing to the channel and hitting that little bell notification. I love doing that. Well, the success of the first game was quickly in the rearview mirror for Ishii and the Tekken project, as they were already developing a more refined sequel like they wanted from the very beginning. Tekken 2 launched in arcades only a year later in 1995, and this one was an even greater success for a few reasons. The graphical improvement in this game was noticeable while still remaining on the same hardware. The character roster also grew from 17 to a very meaty 25 playable fighters, each retaining the trend of having their own CG cutscenes. Every character also had their own distinct fighting style now, with more unique moves, attack reversals, an overhauled throw system, and even the introduction of stances, unlocking different movesets with Jackie Chan-inspired newcomer Lei Wulong. Once it came to consoles a year after, it even had a large amount of modes on offer that enhanced the package, introducing staples like Time Attack, Team Battle, Survival Mode, and the coveted Holy Grail beginning to plant the seed of its promising competitive scene someday, Training Mode. This was the game where Tekken really started on its way to becoming a household name, almost standing atop the shoulders of its competitors, which I'll get to in a little bit. It sold about twice as much as the original Tekken. Ishii unfortunately left Namco after the second game was released in arcades. He said, "They told me to quit." Also, at the time, I wasn't a full-time employee, but rather a contract worker to ensure the project was successful. So I felt I couldn't move up if I stayed at Namco, which was one of the reasons I left. He created his own company, Dream Factory, which would go on to make a few other fighters like Tobal No. 1 and 2, Urgaze, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, guys. Yeah, guys.
The beloved 99% developed but unfortunately cancelled Kenju, and The Bouncer. But back to Namco. Mr. Ishii's vacant Tekken director seat was handed off to a very charismatic man, who by now we've all heard of, named Katsuhiro Harada, whose influence within the team had been growing since its time working on the first Tekken game. I think it's worth talking about his background for just a moment because it partly explains why the upcoming Tekken 3 was able to be as successful as it was, even compared to 2. In the early 90s, Harada worked for Namco's arcade as a promoter. He had a university degree in psychology, which he'd use to great effect with the customers. He'd plan events and tournaments for Street Fighter, and in doing so observed the players. From simply moving arcade cabinets for accessibility and performance, to finding any correlation with beverages and playtime. Having had 2 successful months in a row breaking sales records in Namco's arcade, he was given an award of commendation by the president of Namco at the time, and used that platform to request he be moved into game development sometime in the future. In an interview with Edge in 2013, he said, "I spent an entire year chatting to customers, finding out exactly what they liked or disliked about certain titles. I began to think that I could probably make a more successful title than many of the game creators working at that time. I knew what people wanted from their games and the sort of things that put them off playing." So it worked shortly after, being moved over to the newly formed Tekken project. He was something of a game balancer in Tekken 1 and focused a little more on system design by Tekken 2. But now his first major opportunity to be in a leadership position changed the course of Tekken history for good. While Tekken 2 was a fantastic financial result and introduced many of the series staple characters, Tekken 3 cranked it up to 11, or should I say 12, now running on Namco's System 12 arcade board, which was a slight upgrade from their previous System 11 titles. The focus of this game was truly on the third dimension, not just visually, but making it a true centerpiece of the gameplay experience. You could sidestep incoming attacks in either direction and retaliate, to give players more options than simply blocking. It was faster than its prequels and felt more fluid. There were juggling combos you could consistently perform. Everybody had some sort of reversal in their toolkit. Stances were added to more characters. Chain grabs and the grab system were further expanded upon. Text became faster, the flow was faster, and you could see that at the high competitive level too, now that Tekken was beginning to attract hardcore tournament players. Higher polygon counts allowed for more immersive, expressive characters. You can see this in the main menu with the slick in-game motion capture animations playing before your eyes. The game took place 20 years after the events of Tekken 2. Much of the roster was wiped for newcomers, and their designs were frankly just awesome, so the replacement worked. Unlike Street Fighter 3 at the time, which tried something similar. Players quickly became attached to the newcomers, thanks in part to their creativity for the brand new fighters, and familiar feeling movesets of the characters who were children or disciples of previous characters. It's still arguably the most successful fighting game roster reboot of all time, as Tekken fans to this day can't imagine the franchise being the same without characters like Jin, Brian, Eddie, Xiaoyu, Julia, or Hwoarang. To top it all off, if you didn't enjoy the Versus fighting mode, there were still other options for you to enjoy. Besides the game modes that Tekken 2 had introduced, Tekken Force was the brand new spin-off darling, a 3D beat-em-up style mode with simplified inputs where you get to choose anybody of your choice to go up against legions of bad guys. Tekken Ball was also new, allowing you to play a form of back-and-forth volleyball using your character's move list. Everybody who owned a PS1 practically owned this game. It became a cultural touchstone for many.
Me and Ben used to just literally spend all night playing Tekken Fighter games or Street Fighter.
And sold almost twice as much as Tekken 2 at roughly 8 million copies worldwide. It solidified the series for many sequels to come and overtook Virtua Fighter financially for the first time in history. But success on this scale breeds competition. Tekken was challenging Virtua Fighter, but who else was vying for the top spot? Who were its competitors? And where are they now? With the 3D craze in full swing during the mid to late 90s, every other company wanted a piece of the pie. There were so many other popular 3D fighting games in this golden era. Zero Divide, Star Gladiators, Last Bronx, Fighting Vipers, Rival Schools, Toy Fighter, Bloody Roar, Ergates, whatever the fuck, Tobal, Fighter's Destiny, Bushido Blade, Battle Arena Toshinden. He's right. The list just went on and on. Nobody in this time knew what was going to stay and what would be lost to time. Every company was begging to stick out with unique, inventive mechanics that continuously pushed the genre forward. The most notable heavy hitters in the genre around this time outside of Tekken were weapons-based Soul Edge, Action Boobies blockbuster Dead or Alive, and the previously mentioned Virtua Fighter. Let's talk about them in more depth, because they're the ones who came closest to having Tekken's staying power, and I think their stories are just as fascinating. This is going to be a long one, a doozy, because I'm going over like 3 franchises, but put your thinking caps on. I promise these are worth hearing. Soul Edge, or Soul Blade in the US, was another Namco-developed 3D fighting game, this time focusing on weapon combat, and also being one of the first to motion capture it alongside Sega's Last Bronx. It was clean and graceful and looked gorgeous in motion. The series had what was called the iconic 8-way run, allowing you to run quickly in any direction, even diagonally, to give it a sense of speed and elegance. Attacks were simple to understand and intuitive like Tekken, with 4 buttons, one for horizontal slashes, vertical slashes, and kicks, with the 4th button reserved for blocking. It also shared ring-outs with Virtua Fighter, a feature that Tekken chose not to implement to help set it apart. Soul Edge later transformed into the Soulcalibur we all know it by today, and spawned many sequels featuring the same defining features. To many, it's considered the greatest weapons-based 3D fighting game franchise of all time. Soulcalibur 2 is still proclaimed as the pinnacle of the series, featuring famous guest characters like Link, Heihachi, or Spawn, depending on which of the 3 consoles you bought it for. The gameplay was extremely fast and very conducive to pick up and play sessions at friends' houses, without much in the way of system gimmicks. It's seriously a beautiful fighting game, but bad business and development decisions piled on after. Namco decided Soulcalibur 3 was suddenly a PS2 exclusive, shoving aside GameCube and Xbox owners who were eagerly awaiting the next sequel. It completely squandered momentum. Later, Soulcalibur 5 was a return to form for gameplay, making it faster than Soulcalibur 4, which had been panned for the slowest gameplay in series history. But Namco unfortunately rushed it out the door, so it had very little single-player content and a poorly received roster reboot. It was doing the Tekken 3 thing of jumping into the future and attempting to replace fan favorites with new characters, but people just didn't care about these ones. They felt Fisher-Price, great value, undercooked and unnecessary, especially after they'd now known the old guard for over 4 sequels. This is the unfortunate downside to sharing a development company with Tekken. You inevitably feel the need to copy its successes in some way, but you are forever not the golden goose. You're always handed less money, less resources, and less advertising. Yes, there was a time where Soulcalibur was honestly thought of as the franchise that would win out over Tekken at Namco, but since Soulcalibur 5, that has certainly not been the case in the eyes of corporate. Soulcalibur is rather unique in that it didn't have a publicized, strong central figure who acted as its pillar, like Harada. It's a very group effort franchise, with most of the credits often just pointing to Namco or Project Soul, which sort of contributes to its aimlessness at times, and is probably why sequels almost have to be petitioned for. Their most recent attempt was with Motohiro Okubo, who moved away from producing Tekken 7 to produce Soulcalibur 6, and aimed to reignite that spark from the early days.
Do your souls still burn?
He successfully pitched the game to Namco higher-ups, receiving a modest budget, and got Project Soul back together, who had disbanded after Soulcalibur 5, and they reused lots of its assets too. For the most part, the game succeeded. In gameplay, it was fast and aggressive, yet graceful again like Soulcalibur 2, though many complained about the new reversal edge mechanic because it felt like a canned rock-paper-scissors cutscene that broke the flow of the game. The player base was doing decent and momentum was consistent as new DLC characters were revealed, always bringing back fan favorites and including more cool gaming cameos in Geralt, 2B, and Haomaru. It had an entire 2 seasons of DLC content until COVID. With still mediocre netcode in this era, with any and all tournaments shut down, and no allocated budget to fix the online infrastructure, it was the nail in the coffin. The final DLC released in December of 2020, and Okubo left Namco after 25 years in August of 2021, solidifying people's worries that the series was once again in limbo. Project Soul was disbanded for the second time, and not a word has been said since, except for Harada's surprisingly in-depth explanation on Twitter about why he believes internally at Namco, Soulcalibur slowly withered away and lies dormant. It's a fascinating, extremely wordy read from a high-position company insider, so I do recommend it, but unfortunately, for now, the flame died out with Soulcalibur. The other major competitor, Dead or Alive, was a last-ditch effort from struggling developer Tecmo, literally meaning what it says in the title for the fate of the company. Either this game sells and we're alive, or it fails and we're dead. DOA was a 3D fighting game franchise that has a lot more in common with Virtua Fighter's presentation style when you watch it in action. It was actually designed specifically to compete with Virtua Fighter, much like Tekken, except it focused on speed and a parry system known as the 3-way or 4-way hold, allowing you to read whether someone's going to hit with a high, mid, or low, and parry accordingly. The buttons changed around a bit over time, but it's generally played with 4 of them: punch, kick, throw, and hold/guard. Originally there wasn't even a guard button. You had to hold back on the stick like a traditional fighter, but this wouldn't save you for long, so players were incentivized to learn their opponent's rhythm like a real martial artist and parry their incoming attacks. It had an immediately iconic set of characters off the rip, borrowing from Ninja Gaiden's established lore and including characters from that Tecmo franchise, alongside expertly crafted DOA original characters. It really stood on its own as a heavyweight thanks to another pillar of its design: the environmental hazards that added to the over-the-top movie set feel of each fight. No ring-outs, only explosions. When it moved on to its sequels, DOA 2 and 3, it pushed the limits of visuals at the time, looking absolutely jaw-dropping at 60 frames a second. People credit Dead or Alive as popularizing stage transitions, where you're able to fling somebody through the window of a 20-story building, see them crash through neon lights on the way down, and continue your fight on the ground level below. It was completely unheard of at the time, and people loved how dynamic it made each fight feel. They also loved the girls, having been designed very seductively. On purpose. Series creator Tomonobu Itagaki always had his own philosophy for the franchise, which focused on being less reserved than its polite, traditional counterparts. Speaking in an interview with G4, he said,
"Well, I think entertainment needs sexuality and violence. So if entertainment lacks sexual elements, then it's entertainment no more."
This dude is so based. This could be found in the very first game, which featured the first ever example of genuine soft engine booby physics. In fact, famously, Tecmo later put out their own spin-off series called Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, which you can tell where this is going. Itagaki wanted to appeal to fans at the time who were asking him for a volleyball minigame, much like Tekken's Tekken Ball, but with a much more erotic vibe, putting its physics system to the forefront. He agreed to develop the idea, having been inspired by the aesthetics of Final Fantasy X2, and this evolved to the point where it was too big an addition to include inside the main series, and so fans got a standalone game featuring multiple mini-games involving their favorite female characters, now bikini-clad. It was the truest incarnation of fan service.
I'm creating entertainment rather than just a video game. So in terms of entertainment, it's quite natural for me to create beautiful women. It makes sense rather than bringing ugly women into the game. It's very simple. Naturally.
Itagaki, for all of his amazing rockstar aura, unfortunately left Tecmo in 2008, citing contentions and lawsuits against its higher-ups. This meant the franchise lost its creator and central pillar. Yohei Shimbori stepped in from then on as director for a few spin-offs, and actually worked alongside Sega's AM2 division of Virtua Fighter fame to develop DOA 5. He did good with the franchise for a while, bringing DOA 5 into a great place by the release of Last Round, successfully filling in Itagaki's shoes and even doubling down on the sexual element as time went on and technology improved with Dead or Alive Extreme 3. But in amassing sales through sexually explicit content, including an empire of cash through the PC gacha game Venus Vacation, the series could not shake off its old brand. Tecmo, before the release of Extreme 3 in 2016, made the abrupt decision to cancel the Western releases, Asia only. According to Shimbori, this was because some media outlets were saying negative things about the franchise's objectification elements in the past. This outraged fans, but it only continued going into DOA 6. Tecmo and Shimbori decided that for the next mainline fighting game, it should suddenly pivot to being more about esports, an attempt to move away from the controversial erotic elements that made it so successful to begin with. You could see this already before the game was released in the shocking redesigns of series staple characters Kasumi and Ayane, now donning skin-tight tactical ninja gear wrapped around their entire body, devoid of color to give it that more serious, gritty tone. Clothing, wear, and tear mechanics similar to Soulcalibur were also scrapped for the same reasons. This piling news once again struck a very wrong chord with fans. And the weird part was that the marketing drastically contradicted itself. This is where the infamous core values moment happened at EVO 2019, where the goal was to just showcase this new hyper-competitive, clean esports title, right? But
とても真面目なプロデューサーバイマンシンボリです。全然が真面目なやったらポンって揺れるここですよこここれがね本当にこれがリアルな揺れなんですけどすごいこの縫い目あるかないかで全然違うよね。でもうちょっと真正面どこだそっちのでも真上ですよ。
Yeah, not exactly selling you that message, huh? The franchise was clearly having a self-imposed identity crisis, and the rest of the game on release wasn't exactly amazing enough to make up for it. The product didn't feel complete. Its DLC was ridiculously expensive, the content was bare bones, the progression sucked, and overall it just lacked polish. The game's sales reflected this. It truly was DOA, dead on arrival. Not even supported longer than 1 year, and unfortunately, with no good netcode, it couldn't see a COVID revival either. Shimbori left Team Ninja in 2023 to go be assistant director on Tekken 8. Oh, go figure. Though I will say he says he wasn't involved with the gameplay, so put down your pitchforks, sit the hell down.
Sit the hell down!
But anyways, on a more serious note, into cryostasis this legendary franchise goes too, with the only DOA game to come out since 2019 being the Venus Vacation Prism dating sim, concluding that the only part alive about this franchise right now is, ironically, its sexy spin-offs. Now, lastly, Virtua Fighter had an interesting story akin to the tortoise and the hare against Tekken. As I mentioned before, it was bleeding edge and expensive. Crowds were wowed by the gimmick of 3D polygon animated fights. But ironically, for all its glitz and glamour early on, once the graphics gimmick wore off and its sole selling point was realism, its competitors seemed much more shiny to the average kid. Tekken and DOA were slowly perfecting what Virtua Fighter had pioneered, often copying and putting their own spin on whatever Virtua Fighter would do first, because that's why their franchises existed to begin with. Sidestep mechanics? We'll do that too. Undulating, uneven stages? We'll do that too. A bound system to extend combos? We'll do that too. Your characters? They're mine now. Fuck it. Okay, sometimes Tekken or DOA had these designs first, but you get the point. They share a ton of DNA. Take everything Sega did and make it more of a visual spectacle. That was Tecmo and especially Namco's modus operandi. I don't want to discredit them, as tons of original ideas have been bounced between arcade companies through the decades both ways. But Namco in the 90s is quite funny to look at how often they swooped in with their own more commercialized version of a successful Sega machine only a year later. Examples include Head-On, then Pac-Man, Turbo, then Pole Position, Space Harrier, then Burning Force, Virtua Racing, then Ridge Racer, Wave Runner, then Aquajet, Virtua Cop, then Time Crisis, and of course Virtua Fighter, then Tekken. It was a relentless chase. Sega did still dominate much of the Japanese domestic arcade scene, but both Namco and Tecmo focused their sights to the West and globalization, which paid off in the long run. This is more of a personal opinion here, but I think there's something to be said about the difficulty of Virtua Fighter versus other offerings. The game was hard, which is amazing to say for a fighter that's played with 3 buttons, only 2 of which actually attack. Inputs like teching were tighter, movement was stiffer unless you knew what you were doing, you had to wag the stick immediately to avoid getting comboed off a stun, and there was just generally a higher skill floor you had to get to start having engaging fights that also looked cool. Button mashing in Virtua Fighter kinda just involved dudes getting a few punches and kicks out. But in other games, you'd have strings.
This dude's doing strings!
And cooler animations that flowed into each other better. The competition was generally becoming more approachable to casuals. Sega kept certain crucial inputs difficult seemingly on purpose. They were taking the SNK route of remaining the legacy fighter for true arcade heads who love tough inputs and difficult gameplay. Respectable, but doesn't translate to money. Another reason for its decline could be attributed to its lack of a real story. When series creator Yu Suzuki attempted to make a Virtua Fighter RPG featuring characters from the game, it instead evolved into Shenmue with an original cast. Sega's done other mediocre spin-offs aimed at children, and even an anime and manga adaptation of the game, but the mainline fighting games themselves never had an epic story, or character interactions, or CG cutscenes. To most people, they were just martial arts practitioners who were plopped into an arena and fought. I discovered later the reason that the wiki has so much information on these characters is because they tell the story through the fucking game manuals. The manuals! The series also stayed on Sega's dying flop consoles early on, like the Saturn and Dreamcast, until awkwardly signing for PlayStation 2 exclusivity with Virtua Fighter 4, instead of attempting to spread its influence over to Xbox or GameCube in the wake of Sega's failed console business. I'm discovering a trend researching all of these games, so there's a history of taking the Sony money with a lot of these franchises. Tekken on PlayStation was already an established king by then, so Virtua Fighter moves in, and a lot of the younger PS2 console generation don't even know what it is. Yes, Tekken 4 kinda sucked sales-wise, which might have helped Virtua Fighter's odds a little bit, but it had little staying power once Tekken 5 rolled around. Suzuki was not involved for Virtua Fighter 5 for the first time in series history, and though it's a good game, it just didn't sell well enough in 2006 for Sega to see a need to continue the franchise in any meaningful mainline way, besides revisions to VF5. Suzuki officially left Sega in 2012 to venture off on his own, and we haven't seen anything new out of this franchise in almost 20 years. Only a few mobile games and the more recent VF5 remakes. They lost one of their most creative figureheads and were paying for their inability to financially capitalize on their ideas like their competitors. Sega was in dire straits as a company. When you saw Sega on the cover of a game from the 7th or 8th gen console era, that was not a guaranteed stamp of quality like it used to be. Make no mistake, this franchise was dead since its last revision of Virtua Fighter 5 in 2012. So what changed between then and now? Why might Tekken finally be properly contested by Virtua Fighter once again in the near future? Well, let's take a look at what happened to Sega in the last 10 years. The Ryuga Gotoku division, or RGG, continuously hard-carried their finances with the Yakuza series, especially with the release of Yakuza 0 in 2015, acting as a perfect new entryway into the franchise. Sega also won a bid to acquire the bankrupted Atlas in 2013, and Persona 5 then sold like hotcakes in 2017. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie turned out amazingly successful in 2020, spawning now 2 more lucrative sequels. Sega realized with this new influx of money from successful ventures that they were once again in a position to bring back their golden age franchises for a modern, global audience. Similar to what Capcom started doing around the release of Resident Evil 7 or Monster Hunter World in the late 2010s. The re-release of VF5, now remade by RGG, tested the waters on whether there was still a market for a sequel. Sega negotiated with Sony to release the game free for a limited time on PS4 with PlayStation Plus, and the results after nearly 10 million downloads? There is. At the Game Awards just last year, we finally got a teaser. Guys, it's truly happening. We're getting the first ever original Virtua Fighter entry in 2 decades. The grandfather of the genre, the pioneer, is back. Information is still fairly scarce on the project, but I'll sum up the things they plan to do differently this time that really have me excited. Firstly, it now runs on Dragon Engine, RGG's beautiful in-house engine used on their Yakuza titles that they clearly have plenty of experience developing for.
Editing blue here, it said on the wiki it runs on Dragon Engine, but there was recently a tweet from the producer saying it's on Unreal, so oopsies. I still trust the process though.
They want to modernize the functionality of the game, how it actually plays, and the approachability of it from a newcomer's perspective. Producer Riichiro Yamada didn't elaborate too much, but admits the franchise generally got more complicated over time. They're currently experimenting with functional changes while retaining the original core appeal of the game, because without these changes, he feels it wouldn't sell. They're also not distracting themselves on an arcade release, seemingly at all, since that hasn't even been mentioned. The focus is clearly on RGG are redesigning the characters from the ground up to be cooler for a modern audience. Virtua Fighters always had rather simple designs, especially in the earlier games, which some love and others find a little boring. You can already see RGG's influence with Akira's ragged nomad clothing, featuring a cool brimmed hat that shadows his eyes, and Wolf's reveal showing off a wrestler who's gone from face to heel and grown a badass beard while he's at it. He's kind of giving me Ryuji vibes, right? So far, the old guard have a tougher, seasoned, more rugged look to them, while the newcomers like this Stella girl keep a bright, innocent appearance about them, which I think is a nice dichotomy that'll aid in the memorability and distinction between the generations. A funny anecdote in an interview with Yamada is that they don't actually want to replace Akira with a new poster child either, because they realized how tough it is to keep fans satisfied when you swap out the main character they've grown up with for so many years. In the Yakuza series, the pivot to Ichiban as a protagonist instead of Kiryu didn't go over so well with everyone, so that's why Kiryu has a stronger role in Yakuza 8, and why Akira is going to continue to be Virtua Fighter's poster child instead of someone new. They're also, crucially, adding a story front and center to finally give us a real cinematic window into these characters' motivations. This is RGG we're talking about, the people responsible for our favorite Japanese soap operas. We don't know the details, but people theorize this may be a Tekken 3 soft reboot situation, where there are the old school and also new school fighters who carry on the legacy decades after the previous entry. This has always been a tricky thing to do for fighting games, as we saw with Soulcalibur 5, and it usually flops. But with the combo of cool character redesigns, keeping the OG main character front and center, and a focus on cinematic storytelling, my blue spiritual particles are buzzing with instincts to believe in this one. I'm not even going to talk about how amazing the combat looks in the previews we've been given. All I will say is that the spectacle is absolutely a prime consideration. Sega's current president, Shuji Utsumi, has the motto right now of go big, and so the Virtua Fighter team is doing just that, never settling for something okay, but instead something incredible. And Harada himself is chomping at the bit for serious 3D fighter competition again, from the very company that roused Tekken to exist in the first place. Neither Harada nor Yamada want this rivalry between their two franchises to be a game of binary win or lose. They both understand that each game will have differences that appeal to different audiences. That's the beauty of the complex genre that is 3D fighters. They want a fight that continues to flow, blow for blow, both sides giving it all they've got, into perpetuity. Virtua Fighter was knocked out for some time, and Tekken's been standing alone on its peak holding down the fort. As many of us know, even Tekken 7 was supposed to be that franchise's last hurrah in 2017 as well. We wouldn't have had any clear king or engaging new 3D fighters left on the market, but the success of its competitive scene, the hype visual elements for spectators, the social media buzz surrounding its unexpected crossover characters, and frankly how much Street Fighter V sucked at the time, meant that this game blew up, and Harada was told by the head of Namco that Tekken has secured many sequels off this game alone. So, I hope from this video that you've gained some heightened knowledge of where all these companies stand and why the genre is as sparse as it is. 3D fighting games are my favorite kind of fighting game, but they are hard to develop. They're highly technical, highly expensive, and these days you're always being compared to the other guy in the market. Tekken's success was not merely a fluke. They didn't just get lucky for 30 years straight. Harada and Namco have made very wise business decisions over decades to poise the franchise where it is today. Tekken, in spite of a stagnant 3D fighter industry devoid of adversaries, somehow thought up ideas from a vacuum and still continued to push the genre forward with the introduction of the heat system, which I personally think is a great mechanic that it needs a lot of tuning. Tekken 8's gotten a lot of flack over its overhauling of the fundamentals. It's currently going through its love-hate phase from the fans as it tries to balance itself out across seasons and slowly tone down the aggression. But this loss of faith in the direction of the franchise from some would be prime opportunity for someone to swoop in and offer something just as great. And I am so excited to see how this re-emerging legendary rivalry between the two 90s arcade giants of 3D fighters shakes out. Maybe it even leads to a renaissance later down the line of multiple great new 3D offerings simultaneously, like we've been seeing with 2D fighters as of late. Only time will tell where this path leads in the future, in the wise words of Kazuya Mishima. Thanks to everyone who stuck around this long. I know it was a doozy. I don't normally make videos quite this long, but it grew in complexity as I realized how much I missed these franchises that were seemingly dead. I want them to come back, I really do. So I feel like this is just important history for people to learn because I learned so much about the stuff that I thought I was already a fan of. But what are your thoughts on the state of things? You can leave a comment below or even join the Discord if you want to have a more direct conversation with me and the Ceruleans. Take care, till next time, and honey bunches of Otsu.